Welcome to the Smart and Soulful Money Podcast. I'm your host, Carrie B. Van Winkle. I'm a socially responsive investment advisor with Natural Investments, and a warm welcome to you. My guest today is Christine Kane, who's the founder of Uplevel You, a multi-million-dollar business coaching company, which is a natural evolution from her 15-year career as a touring singer-songwriter with her own record label. Both businesses were built from scratch without a single investor. Learning as she went, Kane did it all step by step and now shares this wisdom with her clients so they finally get it, apply it, and succeed on their own terms. Her company's masterminds, trainings, and events draw entrepreneurs from around the world. Kane leads a small yet mighty team at Uplevel World headquarters in Asheville, North Carolina. Her openness and humor online, on stage, and in writing are what first attract her clients, or her peeps as she calls them, to her and her approach to business. They become devoted followers and enthusiastic advocates because what she teaches works. Their lifestyles and bank accounts prove it. Her first book will be published in November 2020. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
I'm smiling the whole time I'm reading your bio because I can say an enthusiastic yes to every line in your bio. And just wanted to share with everyone that I have a personal experience of working with Christine and feel like I got my MBA from you. And it's really the real world entrepreneur's MBA in a lot of ways is what I feel like I got. And, I worked pretty intensively with Uplevel and You for about 4 years. And I just feel like what you teach, bringing together the strategy and the soul of business, not only applies to our businesses, but also just to how we live our life. And so I think listeners will hear that in our conversation today.
Great. I'm really happy to be here.
I also wanted to share that, when I first learned about you, a friend and a business colleague told me about your work, and I started following you and listening to how you were talking about business. And I was in a place where I had a career, very passionate about what I was doing in the world, and also transitioning into having my own business as a financial advisor, moving out of the nonprofit world and into kind of this new space, and being kind of a passionate but a workaholic, mission-focused person in my work. And then knowing that, okay, I'm going to have my own business now. I did not want to start this business and bring all of those ways of kind of being like what I think of as exploitive to myself by being such a workaholic, where my passion turns into workaholism. And I just heard you talk about how it is possible to have a business where you can be healthy, you can bring your whole self to your business, you can bring your spirit and your values into your business, and you were just speaking my language. You really helped me learn how to then intentionally create a business in a way that honored myself as a whole person, as a healthy person, and also that in, creating my business in a way that can best serve my clients and create a positive impact in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. I love that you said that. And I think it's an important thing to talk about right now because so many people are feeling really disillusioned by everything that's going on in the world. And there are a lot of people thinking about, could I start my own business? And, maybe now's not the right time. And it absolutely is, and it's possible. And we'll talk about some of that as we go today. But what I love is that you are so honest in saying, I wanted to make sure I started this not with all of those typical traits that so many of us see in other business owners. And I would add in, like when you talked about the business, it's also about the marketing, which is one of those dreaded words for so many people. And the way I teach marketing is that it's just about how you communicate. And what you just did there, Carrie, which I love, is that you communicated really authentically, and you brought that human side to your communication there. And I think a lot of people, they think that if they're going to start a business, they've got to be one way. If they're going to market, they've got to be manipulative. And the essence of everything that we all do is bringing ourselves and what I would say our souls into this dream, this vision that we may have for ourselves. And that's what really helps somebody take off and grow something that matters to them and is also strategically aligned with them and soulfully aligned with them.
Your new book that's coming out is called The Soul Sourced Entrepreneur, an unconventional success plan for the highly creative, secretly sensitive, and wildly ambitious. And I've gotten to hear you read some passages from it or some even a chapter from it on your podcast. And I'm just super excited about reading it. So tell me what a soul sourced entrepreneur is and tell me a bit about what a soul sourced business looks like.
The writing of that book it's interesting because I had rarely outside of my client base talked about this idea of strategy and soul. And partially because I was kind of hiding that I had this softer side to me. In the business world, and in our world in general, there's this very left brain centric, linear approach to everything from self help to having a passion to having a dream. And there's this almost addiction to a right way to do it, a straight line that you do it in, and you do not stray, and you are very clear and you're very aggressive. And as I started working with clients more and more and more, because I grew my coaching company out of having been a musician and being an artist and growing a successful record label, I began to see the pain that so many of the more sensitive and creative, and not to be gender specific, but many of the women were hiding these parts of themselves and their own wisdom behind this really sort of left brain aggressive model of what business was. And there was one point when I was teaching one of my higher level clients. She had been with me for several years. A lot of my clients are with me for years. And she's a realtor and she was charging forward and really feeling disconnected. And as we worked together, I was working on what I call the soul track of business, meaning, yeah, you've got your strategy. Yeah, you know how to be a realtor, but how do we bring your voice and your sense of self to it? And at one point, she looked at me and said, "You've got to stop hiding this soul track of business that you have, and you have to bring it out so people understand it." And the soul sourced entrepreneur and the soul sourced business began when I started realizing that my gift as a coach, as a teacher, is to get people to understand that, yes, there is strategy to do, but your life is teaching you what you need. Your business is teaching you what you need. And that can be anything from the stuff that's blocking you and also the stuff that you're really, really gifted at. And so when I say soul sourced, I really believe that each of us is in a business, starting a business to learn the lessons that grow us and expand us in ways that our soul is actually preferring that we grow and expand. And so it's this dynamic between these two things, the strategy and the soul, that start to help someone understand their wisdom, their best path, their best practices, their best habits, their best marketing. That's a very long-winded way to explain what the soul sourced entrepreneur is. And I think we all are that, but a lot of us have been trained out of our own wisdom and recognizing that we bring everything that we need to the table for our biggest and best expansion.
Even though a lot of the work that you do really focuses on supporting entrepreneurs and business owners, I feel like my experience of what you teach really is beyond the business owner. You know, it's so critical for a business owner, and also it really applies to everyone and really everyone doing their own version of their work in the world, you know, whatever that is, because you talk about mindset and boundaries and communication and living in a spirit of being creative versus reactive. And all of those things are so much of what, even me personally, I was drawn to working with you because those are the kinds of things that help me with who I want to be in the world as a business owner and also as a human being. What are your thoughts about that?
I absolutely do know that it's the same thing, whether you have a business or a job. I think what each of us is craving is more congruent way of living, a more confident way of trusting ourselves, and a more authentic way of being. And of course, that applies to life. The very first program I ever taught, well, the first thing I did when I was a musician was I started teaching women's retreats. I would do these 3-day retreats. I knew no other musician at the time that was doing them. They were not based in music. They were not teaching creativity. They were strictly focused on how to follow your dreams. And those grew into an online program called Uplevel Your Life, which then grew into my company called Uplevel You. And then I started focusing on business because so many people coming to me were tired of the same old path and the same old things they were doing. And I think a lot of us have been taught to just default to ways of being that these rules that are just kind of came out of nowhere. We've never actually looked deeply at ourselves. And so, yes, I do know that everything I teach can be applied to somebody who has a job as well as a business, because I've had both in my trainings. But ultimately, I think each one of us is aiming toward being in the driver's seat of our own lives. And we don't know what that actually looks like. And we have not ever learned how to trust ourselves, because when we fall on our faces or on our knees or whatever, we haven't learned that there is so much wisdom in everything each of us is facing, and every mistake we've made and every victory we've had, that our lives get shaped by those things. Our businesses get shaped by those things. It just so happens that when you have a business, there's that one added piece in it, and that's what you talk about, is money. And when we're in charge of other people's well-beings and our own well-beings and our money, we become our own little economy. And when we become our own little economy, we become our own autonomous leader of so many things that most people aren't willing to take that risk on. And so there's this beautiful evolution that happens for each person when they are able to really step into the leadership role of their lives. And so, yes, it does apply to life and business, because there's all those lessons that you need to learn. It just so happens that when people are super highly triggered and charged because they're the one in charge of their own money and their family and everything, I happen to be very good at stepping in and guiding that person in that situation, because it's an unusual situation. Less and less now as people start their own businesses and side hustles, but it's just the skill sets are very similar. It's just that I think that when you are responsible to make the money, I think there's a lot more shame that can come up, a lot more pain that can come up, a lot more fear that can come up. And so the lessons become that much more imperative.
The challenges can be magnified by having your own business, whatever that challenge is around money or around responsibility or just the things that we're challenged by in our life. Then you put a business on top of that and it just magnifies that.
When I first got out of college, I had a cubicle job for a year, and I'd have days where I'd show up and sort of dial in, like, meh, I don't feel like working today, and you don't get, like, you can do that as a business owner, but you feel the impact of that almost immediately. Like when I teach always be marketing, ABM, we're always marketing. And that doesn't mean you're out like, kicking ass and taking names. It means that you learn how to be consistent, how to have follow through, how to communicate. And when you don't show up for 3 weeks or you go on a Netflix binge, you're no longer being consistent in anything. And as a business owner, that option becomes very instantly painful, because you aren't getting the paycheck anyway, because now, like, you didn't do the work to get the clients, and so you just don't have the luxury of letting your typical mindset patterns floor you as much. And so then what we have to work on is, how do we deal with those mindset patterns when they come up? And this year especially, we've changed the name of my mastermind, which is M Club. I've changed it to the Resilience Crew. In March, I changed it as soon as COVID hit, because I started to see where the fear would make someone just completely collapse, or the anxiety or the world news and all that stuff. And my role then as coach, as leader, was, we're not going to do that here. We're going to really, and our little tagline became bringers of light, masters of uncertainty. because uncertainty is the new normal now. And I wanted to help people navigate their mindset themselves, because this is an opportunity to say, wow, now I really get to see my patterns. And it's been beautiful to watch people evolve into and out of all the different stresses that are coming up as business owners right now. Beautiful and hard. I don't want to act like I'm just sitting back and going, wow, what a lovely thing, because it's challenging for all of us right now.
The external structures that someone has with being an employee of a company, that you have these external structures usually put on you in certain ways, and you just don't have those as a business owner in the same way. And so you need some supports, I want to say, on around your internal structures, so that you can move through these challenging times in a way and not just get stalled out.
That's a really important point that you made. And I've seen some of the people who have worked with me who have had the hardest time in starting up a business because they didn't expect it. They were people who just absolutely ruled their corporate job. They were regional directors, national directors, that kind of thing. And then they get into their own business, and suddenly the key things that come up for people are, first off, it was so much easier to sell and market when I wasn't the product. When it's somebody else, I could hide behind that product. I could hide behind a company name. That was what was creating my whole entire sense of self. And then I also had people to report to, and I had convenient, time management. I knew exactly what had to be done because I was told what had to be done. So when you step into a role of a business owner, suddenly there's the vulnerability of, I'm the product. Oh my goodness. Or my company's the product and I don't feel so big anymore. I can't hide anymore. And I have to go be seen. And I got to manage my emotions, my time, and my energy in a way that I never really planned on doing. And so that's the gift of it, is when we talk about the word empowerment, which is so overused, as to the point where some of us don't even know what it means anymore. What I see with my clients when they've worked with us for a year, 2 years, 3 years, some up to 9 years at this point, they understand, they experience what power is. They experience that very, very nebulous word called empowerment, because they start to understand who they are, and they understand how to navigate their own energy, which is really a great skill set to learn, because that's where confidence comes from.
I have this assumption that power is one of the concepts that you've kind of explored for yourself and, as a coach and as a teacher. And I would love to hear you talk more about what insight you've gotten so far, or, what power even means to you. The reason I ask is because it's a really critical piece in my work. I feel like that money and power really are like such strongly overlapping energies for me. Barbara Stanny says that for women in money, because she teaches about money a lot, for women in money, it's really not about money a lot of times. It's about our relationship with power that we really have the challenge with. And so I know you don't just work with women business owners, but you do work a lot with women business owners. I'm sure you've seen this over the years, our, relationship with power in the business, whether it's money, navigating our personal relationships. For me, the importance of us being able to have a healthy relationship with power, as I want us to have a healthy relationship with money, so that we can create change in the world that we want to create.
The hard thing about using words like power is that everybody has a different definition they're bringing to the table of what that word is. They have an experience of power, they have a resistance of power, they might have a negative view, they might have a positive view. And I know that you understand the Enneagram, and I think that we could have an entire dialogue about Enneagram, power, money, and that kind of thing, and what people bring. Where I would go with the idea of power, so as not to just repeat some of the usual things everyone says, is that when we have a relationship with power, ultimately it's not about power, it's about a relationship with ourselves. And so that our mantra at I don't call it a mantra, but it's what we say at Uplevel You. And I teach my clients from day one is the phrase, I'm in. And the reason I started using that phrase was one time early on in my masterminds, there was a female business owner. She stood up in front of the room and she was new. It was her first mastermind with me, and she was having her coaching session. And she was irritated at her team. And she was standing there really complaining and really having a hard time. And she said, I just want them to be over there doing their work, and I want to be over here doing my thing. And I stopped her in front of the room and I said, freeze. And I said, I want you to look at how you're standing right now. Because even though it's somebody in a moment just rambling, it sounds like I'm overthinking this, but she was faced one way and her team was behind her, and she was brushing her hands like at the team, like, get away from me. And I said, your business is behind you and you're facing a whole different way, and you're brushing them off as if you don't want to deal with it. And I started to see that theme for a lot of people is I don't want to be in my business. I don't want to be in my relationships. I don't want to be in anything. I just want everything to be taken care of. And I want to be over here doing this one little thing. And whereas I understand where that sentiment comes from and that feeling comes from, our true power, to use that word, to anchor back to that word, is when we are fully engaged and fully present. And when we say I'm in at Uplevel, what it means is that I am bringing all of me. I am not absenting my spirit, to use a term from the book Fierce Conversations, I think it is, but I'm not pulling myself out of it. Like, I just don't want to deal today. I don't like this person today. I don't like this today. To be really, truly powerful, full of power, is the power to, not the power over. It is the power in, the power to be able to internalize, experience, be present to all of it, and knowing that you have the power to choose, the power to stay present, the power not to run and like just go do, to anchor back to the other example, the Netflix binge or whatever it is. So many of us are trained to, in some way, step out of what's happening in front of us. And so in your case, for instance, we've talked about your business quite a bit, like with people and their money, one thing goes wrong and they absent themselves. They leave, they check out, they stop being in relationship with money. They stop being in relationship with themselves. They give up very fast. And in business, there are so many opportunities to stop having power too. Someone rejects you in a sales conversation. Your marketing sequence doesn't work. Your idea for a program doesn't work. Or an employee steals money and walks away. There's so many ways. And what happens to each person, and this is where things like our patterns and our old mindset loops, things that we've trained ourselves to do over and over in our lives, this is where we have the opportunity to use the power of our presence to step in, to say, I'm in, which I always say sometimes has an exclamation point, sometimes it has a period, where it's just you agree, I'm going to step in and I am going to experience this, and I'm not going to neglect myself. I'm not going to abuse myself. I'm not going to shame myself. I'm going to step in and I'm going to use this. And when you say you got an MBA from me, this is where the MBA is I'm going to fully step in and I'm going to learn from this, as opposed to quick fix, find my way out, figure that, like all the ways we struggle and scheme and run and escape and avoid, to really, really learn from it. And that, to me, is what power is all about. It's not a concept. It's not what we see our political systems doing right now. It's not power over. It is power to, and it's an experience. It's not a word. And it's an evolving experience, and it's a dynamic situation. Some days you feel absolutely powerless and so in pain. And where power comes from, it's again, it's not, I am going to kick ass and take names. It is taking that deep breath, and it is being with the situation at hand and knowing, what step do I take next? It's being the master of uncertainty, as I say, not because you know how to kick uncertainty's ass, but because you know how to be completely, fully present to it and navigate your day from that place. And that, I mean, it's a long-winded answer to what power is, but I think it applies across the board, whether we're talking about money, whether we're talking about raising a family, whether we're talking about being in a marriage, or being with your money and staring at a spreadsheet that you're very uncomfortable staring at, whatever it might be. It's okay. I'm here. I'm in. I've got this. Even when you don't feel like you have it, but your presence means that you have it.
Are there a couple of things that have helped you with that presence? What has helped you, and what do you teach others about how we reconnect to that power of our presence? How we are able to bring our presence to the day-to-day challenges and the day-to-day experiences with our business or in our bigger life?
Well, I think the answer to that always is going to be, it depends. And part of that is because power is not a static concept. And finding a sense of your own power really depends on where you are right now. So for me, when I started on this path as a musician, like my bio reads like I just sort of decided to be a musician, and it all worked out great. And then I started a company. And this is the problem with bios. It's the problem with social media. I had left my cubicle job. I had moved to where I live now, Asheville. I was healing an eating disorder. I was very, very bulimic out of college. And I had all of the tendencies of a very powerless 23, 24-year-old young woman. I did not know who I was. I just wanted someone to come along and rescue me and fix me. And my journey where I was then began with healing bulimia. And that taught me a lot about being in my body. And so that's one aspect of it, is that understanding that power is not a concept that's just out there hanging around. You have it or you don't. Our bodies are huge manifestors of our own power and our own out of balance, our lack of balance with power and our lack of power. And so what one place that I would say to anybody to not neglect is your body, meaning your breath. So a lot of our mindset loops and where we get off track, it starts with our breath, because in our lives, when something happens, let's say anxiety, we have a breath pattern that matches anxiety. And we have a breath pattern that matches shame. And we have a breath pattern that matches fear. And so when you can, one of the first places I teach my clients to go, and Carrie, you've experienced this, is that we begin our sessions at Uplevel with box breathing, which is not, it might sound woo, but it's not. It's used by special ops in the military, and it's used by Zen monasteries. It's not an uncommon thing to use, but it's just a simple technique where you breathe, you hold, you inhale, you hold, you exhale, you hold. And just understanding how powerful your breath is, how powerful your body is a great place to begin with power. And then, and my journey is going to be different from other people, but my next step in terms of learning power was really, really, really helpful to have a coach. I started in with coaches pretty early on in my music career because I'm wired a little emotionally and I'm very much about the feels, and I can get very shamey. I can get very filtered through my emotions. And a coach really taught me how to see outside of that. And this is why I love coaching so much and why I love accountability so much, is that a lot of us, we lose our power because we believe our thoughts. We lose our power because we believe our emotions. And again, this is not a bad thing. It's just that how we've been trained our whole lives, because we were raised in worlds filled with people who didn't understand their own power and taught us ways of reacting and ways of not really responding, just reacting. And we are now living in bodies that behave a certain way because we've trained them. And so this is where coaching comes in with mindset, but it's not just like think positive or all the usual law of attraction methodologies, because then we come back to breath, we come back to body, we come back to emotional responses. And so then we're building out of our typical bodily responses to things. And for me, then coaching brought me out of my emotional and mindset responses to things. And then I started to have the tools to be able to work with and see patterns. And so this is what I teach my clients all the time: is self-awareness is key. Understanding your unique patterns. It doesn't make you some messed up person who's irreversibly going to be this way. You walk into the room, like when you walk into the room with a coach your first time, you want to know who you are. You want to know who's walking into the room. And with that awareness, you begin to work with your emotional responses, your bodily responses, your breath responses. And I know it sounds like it's long and tedious, but the ahas when you work at all those levels start to stack up and you realize, oh, I'm not irreversibly messed up. This is just a pattern. It's just a loop I've been playing over and over. And again, why I love business and why I love money is that they're so highly triggery for us, especially as women, that they begin to teach us this new soul sourced way that we can be in the world. And that's the term I use right now, obviously, because my book is titled that. To evolve and to use what's happening inside of us as ways to discover a new relationship with our power. And that's been my journey with it, and really being kind and learning compassion, and then reaching out to coaches. And coaches are great because they teach us from a more objective standpoint, as opposed to a friend who will often just feed the pattern and say, oh no, you're really a good person, I promise. And suddenly you're not really learning power, you're just learning fixing the pain, which is a real different place.
You mentioned the phrase I'm in and how important it is to the presence that we have with the commitments that we have is kind of one of the ways I would say that, I guess. Also, I heard you talk about this in one of your recent podcast episodes where you've used I'm in as, I'm not sure framework is the right word, but as a structure that you talk about in your book. And so will you talk about that?
When I started my book, I started writing it about 5 years ago, or maybe even 6. And I worked with a book coach, and I just sort of sent her all of my writing right from the start. And I just rambled, and she just kind of was like, yeah, okay. And she was so kind, so good, and so not shamey, which was great, because I'd had some shamey editor types look at my stuff and say, you're just a mess. And as I worked with her, I realized that I'm in became kind of an acronym for me. And then I began to shape the entire book around that one piece, meaning none of this applies if you're not willing to be present and in, really, really in your life, really, really in your business, really, really in your money, whatever it is. And so the acronym, what it became was, the book got broken into 4 parts, and I'm in was what became the acronym. So the first I is for initiating intention, because everything that we do when it comes to power starts with our own intention. What do we want to create here is the ultimate question of intention. Where are we going? What's the direction we're heading in? And as business owners, we've got to know that at some level. And then the M for I'm becomes about managing your power. And that's what the M stands for. And so what that means is that after we initiate intention, and everyone loves to initiate intention. Everyone loves intention. Like, I love this part. I can make a vision board for hours and days, and I love this. But then we step into the journey that the intention takes us on. And what we start to realize is everything I just talked about, is that, okay, now we have to learn what's in the way. What is keeping you from this intention? Meaning that when you plant a seed, the first thing that comes up is not the sprout. The first thing that comes up is the dirt, because what has to happen is what we need to move out of the way, anything that is not serving that intention. And that's what I mean by managing your own power. meaning that we all have this energy moving through us all the time, and understanding that our intention has just released a whole lot of good stuff for us to work through. That's what managing your power is. And then the I that starts I'm in is for interpreting circumstances. Because once you start that intention, once you begin to manage your power, things start happening. And so when a circumstance happens, everyone likes to say that, business is a numbers game, but I always say business is not a numbers game, it's an interpretation game, because a million things happen in a day. Let's say an employee steals money and walks out. You can interpret that a million different ways, but if you're able to anchor back to your intention and you're able to manage your power, you can interpret it from a way that's actually serving your highest good and serving an outcome that you had intended. In other words, that employee leaving can also be a completion, and you can also see where your blind spots led you to ignore something that was happening, and you start to learn, oh, I'm really good at ignoring things. I'm really good at just pretending I don't see something because I'm scared of conflict or whatever it might be. And so interpreting circumstance, again, it's really, really serving you. And then the last N of I'm in is navigating decisions, because once we've moved through those three pieces, it is up to us to keep making decisions to move us forward toward that intention. And all of it begins to intertwine and work with beautifully with one another. But having that framework helps people understand, oh, here's where I am in this process, or here's what's coming up right now. And now I have a new way of framing this and a new way of managing myself and looking this, as opposed to the usual knee jerk, my whole life has trained me this way response to things. And that's where we become really, really savvy entrepreneurs and really, really savvy managers of our own money. And it's just a different way of being, as opposed to just our usual messages of business and money, which is have some and be successful. And, I just don't think that serves so many people these days who are looking for something deeper and more meaningful.
So, one of my other big takeaways from my work with you and what you teach about is coming back to center. And I wanted to talk about this with you today because my focus and who I work with has evolved, and I just completed this program where I'm becoming certified as a financial transitionist, which I don't know if you and I have talked about. I'll be a certified financial transitionist. And so what it is really helping people, particularly, of course, with me, women, move through transitions in their life and how that relates to their money life. So that could be, a lot of times that's an inheritance. It could be a divorce. It could be loss of a spouse. Those are the key ways, but there are so many ways that people can go through these financial transitions. And with that, being able to come back to center, and the way I was thinking about this is how we come back to rooting as we grow and evolve, and the world changes and we change. How we come back to center in rooting back into our authentic self and continuing to ask ourselves what we really want, whether it be in our bigger life, whether it be specifically in our business. I would love to hear you talk about that, how you do that and how you help people do that, come back to our rooted authentic self when we are also navigating big life transitions, business transitions, world transitions, financial transitions.
So a great thing that we could do right now, depending on when people are actually listening to this recording, but we're coming into this new abnormal of our world, and coming back to center means checking back in with yourself, because what used to work pre-pandemic is probably not going to work now, and requiring that you go back and do the things that were working so well for you then, or not, is not going to happen. And so when I talk about coming back to center, the way you have heard me talk about it, Carrie, is in our masterminds, I set the whole thing up so that we're constantly re-anchoring ourselves, recentering ourselves. And the biggest way we do that is that we meet once per quarter, and it used to be in person and now it's virtually, but as a group we all meet, and I set everything up so that there is a lot of what I would call focus 360 work, meaning you're looking at everything in your life. You're celebrating what you've done up till now. You're re-anchoring to your intentions. You're looking at what's challenging you right now. And when I say to come back to center, what tends to happen? And check in with yourself if you're listening to this. Anytime you've gone to, let's say, an event or a retreat, or you've read a book and suddenly you're like, oh my God, I'm so inspired. And yay, I can't believe how this has changed my whole life. What tends to happen to us as we move back into our the construct of our daily lives is gravity strikes, meaning we kind of go back to our usual ways. The stuff that we learned hasn't really stuck, maybe, and we find ourselves doing things the way we were doing them before, and we're back in old patterns. And when we come back to center, it's how I start every retreat, meaning all of that stuff is just pattern. All of that stuff is just loops. Whether you're like ashamed of what you've done, or you're scared again, or you're, God, I got back off my marketing again, or whatever it is, we let it all go. We invite it to just release. And then from a place of neutral, which is where what center kind of is, it's like neutral. And I actually wrote about this in my book of what neutral is, because it's a nice concept, but it's hard to reach sometimes. But you're coming back to sort of neutral and saying, all right, where am I now? What are my challenges? What are my best next steps? What is my intention now? Because intentions sometimes need to shift and they need to change, but you do it from that place of wisdom. You do it from a place of centeredness. And so the quarterly check-in is the big way we do that at Uplevel. But I also have a little acronym I do. It's QMWD, which is quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, meaning that there's always an opportunity to find your way to center. And so in monthly ways, we have ways of doing that. And weekly, I have a tool called the Sunday Summit. And daily, we have accountability check-ins. But for anybody listening, it's really about having some kind of practice or some kind of habit or some kind of way that you can remember who you are. And you can come back into a place that's not riddled with the yammering mind, the perpetual ticker tape of thoughts and feelings and projections and labels that we've given to every last little thing, and really kind of finding some way that you can honor who you are and come back into center. And that's how I use it. And there's no way to do it wrong. It's just remembering who you are, which a lot of us forget pretty regularly.
It's not about looking back and going backwards to something that is your center. It's really about grounding in kind of where your center is now and being able to move forward from that. It's this dynamic place of growth and change, and also being rooted in kind of who we are at our core, and like you said, who we want to be, in that moment, in that day, in that meeting.
I think a lot of us forget who we are. We exit. This is why I'm in is so important. It's anchored to the I'm the coming back to center, because we check out and we dismiss ourselves and we devalue ourselves and we avoid ourselves, like the conversation you and I are having here, there's probably 90% of the world would listen to this and say, what are you talking about? Because we have made it the norm to just absolutely not be in your body, not be in your spirit, not know who you are. And also, if you do know who you are, you pretty much hate who you are, or you have some kind of like feeling of completely fraudulent self. And shifting that pattern and moving into center is so much about facing even the most scary parts of yourself and embracing even the worst parts of yourself. At the end of the book, I have a whole section called Embracing the Funk, which is like all of these little weird, awkward, quirky, strange things about yourself are part of your superpower, and they're part of the process. And not being scared of that anymore, and not being scared of your mistakes anymore, and knowing you're going to fall off the track. And that's the gift. It's the gift of what you do, Carrie. It's the gift of what I do as people in business. And that is where true power comes from, knowing you get back up and you do it again, in spite of the fact that you just completely screwed up. And you've worked with me, and you know that I joked about all the little stupid investments I've made over time, just being a quick start and throwing my, I'm going to try it now. And then, and then being ashamed and not, being terrified to talk to anyone about it. And I can vouch for knowing you the way I do, is that you are one of the easiest people to talk to and not put someone in that place of shame, which so many financial advisors are not good at. But all of us who have tried and fallen and tried it, just that being able to get back up and be aware and be with yourself in the process, that is where power comes from.
It is very, very common for my clients and other women that just, talk to me about their money stuff to express feelings of shame or really what I would call really harsh self judgment. Like we have these really high expectations on ourselves to be able to navigate our money life in ways that are really unfair a lot of times, and especially on our own. It's something that I think I've seen women do maybe even more than men, and then how relieved people are, to just even share that with somebody sometimes, just the power of sharing it and not just hiding it away for no one to see, can be very powerful for people.
It's so enlightening when somebody actually gives you permission. I remember when I read Mike Michalowicz's book, Profit First, in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
he describes the woman who was weeping in front of him for how badly she had managed her money as a successful business owner and felt like she would never be able to dig herself out. And she just was hating on herself. And I had so much compassion, not just for her in that moment, but for me in that moment. It made me realize, and to be able to say we all make mistakes. One of the things I have no tolerance for anymore is just this sort of badass, you should go kick ass and let's make Instagram look perfect and let's make everything look perfect. I really love seeing somebody say, oh yeah, I've messed up many, many times. And we love those stories. We need those stories. We need to understand that there is no perfect.
One of the phrases that you introduced to me was imperfect action. And I have really taken that on very strongly. And I've even said that the only way we can create change in anything is through imperfect action.
Yeah.
That's the only way we can create change in our lives and in the world is through imperfect action. So it's a powerful concept.
I have said to my team and to my coaches that launching this book, putting a book out there after having, been, doing my business now for 10 years and before that being a musician for 15, I feel every bit as vulnerable as I did when I released my first CD. And it feels imperfect. And I drove to Nashville and I read the audio of it. And on my way home, I just had to say to myself, okay, you've got to be nice to yourself here and know this was your first book. Because as you read your own book, you realize, oh God, why I could have done that so much better, and I realized, oh, it just doesn't stop. And the imperfect action thing is part of it. I've wanted to write a book forever, and there's no way anyone's putting their first book out and not feeling imperfect. I feel wonky. It's just that weird thing, and you just don't know how it's going to work out. You never do. So I continue to live by it. I continue to model it. In that way, it also makes me a better coach for my clients because I'm not standing on some, mountaintop on high, shouting down at them from my lofty perch as if I never do anything. I like to really share with my clients all the stuff that I've done so that they understand when they're there, oh, I'm not alone.
Another thing you introduced me to the Enneagram all those years ago. So I'd love to just take a couple minutes and talk about the Enneagram. Just, we have talked about it, you and I. For those who are somewhat familiar with the Enneagram who are listening, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram with a 9 wing. That means I'm this imperfect action thing is really important to me because as a 1, I can be a perfectionist or recovering perfectionist, and that's a big thing with 1s. And I think a lot about the Enneagram when it comes to our relationship with money.
Mm-hmm.
And I love when clients don't have to know this, but if they happen to know, it can be very helpful to me in being the best support to them possible. One couple I have, he's a 3 and she's an 8.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty That's that's a lot.
It's not, it's fun, of course, but it also is just very helpful, I think, in helping people navigate their relationship with money. So, thoughts about that you want to share?
The two things that I use most as a coach, and I don't use them, I want to be really clear, I don't use them as a label maker, meaning I don't, when someone says I'm a one, I don't sit back and go, well, they're really judgmental and they're, whatever. What I do is I use the Enneagram and I use the Colbys. So the Colby A index is a tool developed by Kathy Colby that teaches, for lack of a better, I'm gonna not say it accurately as she would, but I call it your work style, but it's really the way you work when you're striving. And the reason I use both of them is that the Enneagram really speaks to me of the soul of the entrepreneur, the soul of the person I'm coaching, and the Colbys really teach me about how that person needs to work. And what I try to teach people to do is create their business built around themselves and built around their style. And the Enneagram, and what I'm going to say to anybody who's really interested in it is that I did an event last year called the Enneagram and the Entrepreneur in Asheville, and it was very, very popular. I'm going to do an online version of it soon. I'm going to do like a virtual version of it. So if you want to get on my mailing list or go to my website and find something to download, and I'll let you know when I'm doing it again. The Enneagram, the reason I love it and the reason it actually speaks to this idea of soul sourced is that when it's taught well, the Enneagram actually teaches you who you are not. It's so many of us are trying to have this ego, and we've built all these constructs around ourselves. And what the Enneagram actually teaches me as a coach is to show where somebody loops, where they pattern, and where they get stuck. And so in learning the Enneagram, there's certain ways that I realize, like when I have a client who, let's say a client who's is in the emotional triad. There's three triads in the Enneagram. One is the emotional triad, one is the mental triad, and one is the instinctual triad, the body. And when somebody is, let's say, in the emotional triad, it's a different type of pattern response in their business than it's going to be someone who's in the instinctual triad. And it helps me understand ways to guide them and see where they might be getting in their own way, or where they might actually be sabotaging themselves based strictly on who they think they are versus who they truly are. And I look at my work with somebody as ways of peeling off the layers. And the Enneagram just teaches us these 9 really intensely great patterns that we've all sort of locked ourselves into. And granted, it's not just 9 strict patterns that limit somebody to say, this is my type and that's how it is. They all have subtypes. They all have wings. In stress, a number moves to a different number. And when someone's really integrated, they move to another different number. And there's real subtleties involved in it. And the deeper you go in it, the more fascinating it really can become, in that it really teaches you, oh my God, this has nothing to do with who I am. This is a pattern I've been locked in. This is a way I've believed myself to be. And when you really learn the Enneagram well, there's a core essence to each and every number that each of us has been cut off of. And we pretend, we falsify ourselves because we feel so disconnected from that essence. And the way I look at business is that it's actually teaching us to, when we're doing it well, we're tuning more and more into that essence. And then our business can become really a business that grows out of that truth, that essence, that soul, that when we're not all caught up in ego and our fractured selves and our broken selves, it starts to lend itself to this really, really beautiful, holistic way of being in the world. And I know that as I'm speaking, Carrie can probably nod, because money does the same thing. Like teaching someone about money, it's the same thing. Anything that you're truly in your center in, teaches you ways that you just learn all these ways that you've faked, or you've pretended, or you've scared yourself, or whatever, and you don't have to be that way anymore. And so the Enneagram is this beautiful tool when it's done right. I've seen too many people, it's turned into like very meme-ish online now, and I think people use it as a way to shame themselves or shame other people or make fun of stuff. And that's one level. And I think when you first learn it, it is that level, and that's fine. But I really liked people to understand when I know my clients really well, I can say, okay, well, in fact, I had a one recently when COVID started, and she works in the financial world, and something went wrong because some ball got dropped by this family she was working with, and she was about to go pay for this mistake $10,000 out of pocket because she was so convinced that she had done wrong. And I had to back up and say, okay, let's look at this. Because I think as a one, you may be looking at this with a little too harsh of a ruler. And we were able to back up, and she was able to see that and say, you're right. She could not see outside of her blinders. And in that one call, I saved her this enormous expense because she was able to go communicate with the family, and they didn't even judge it as harshly as she did. And suddenly, and she could see the pattern so clearly, and she had so much relief and then so much humor because she could see where she was getting her in her own way and harming herself with that judgmental pattern. To me, that is the gift of when a coach can really work with somebody at a deeper level and not just be like, well, you're a one, and so therefore you're a perfectionist. Because it's so much deeper than that. Oh, you're a four. You just can't get enough of those emotions of yours. No, 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 no. That's it. It just so much deeper. And there's so many negative spins on every number, like fours can't have businesses because they're so completely caught up in their emotions, or ones can't do it. It just drives me crazy. Everyone can have a business. It's just, are you willing to face the patterns that arise and accept that this is nothing more than a pattern, and you have a choice of how you work through it?
For listeners who might not know, so Christine is a four, and that's why she's highlighting four and one. We're the four and the one.
Trust me, I have been told, and I have coached a lot of fours, and there is a real deep shame about, like, well, I must not be wired for business because I'm this way. And it's like, no, 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 no. It's not true.
As we know ourselves in this way through that lens of the Enneagram, for example, and then, like you said, as we know if we have clients and like you and I have, and as we help them navigate through that lens of the Enneagram, also the strengths that they have, the clients who are fours that I work with, beauty is, an important part of like what matters to them. And beauty can be translated in lots of different ways there, but that's the simple word I'll use for now. And so how does that play out in their money life? What's the value, even as I work with people around what matters to them in the world, what their values are. And so how might that be reflected in their values personally, and then also in the bigger world?
And I love that you bring that into your work. I remember reading Dave Ramsey, who I think is probably an eight, and him talking about how when they bought their office space, they would not go into debt, and they did not go get nice furniture, and they just had really bad bare bones and don't ever spend more money. And for me, when I bought our office space with cash. I did the right thing in that it was 2010 and everything was falling apart, and I bought a commercial space where the builder had gone bankrupt, it was like just a kind of a fire sale. But I put time and effort into the beauty because my whole vision was I wanted people to come to Uplevel and want to be there. I wanted it to feel creative and like a warm embrace when you were in there, and beauty was so important. And had I listened to that one person say, here's how you have to do it, because I'm an eight and I'm going to tell you how to do it. And maybe he's a six, I don't know, but my sense of him is that he's very eight-ish, is that there's this coaching style that basically says, here's how you do money and here's how you do business. And if you don't, you're going to fail. And what I love about what you just said is that you give wiggle room to people who aren't that one style. And that's so important. Maybe I had to pay that off then, by styling my space, and I had to pay the price of that. But it just means that I'm going to honor who I am. My business owners are going to honor who they are. And it doesn't all have to be the way that one money guru, that one business guru, that one success guru tells you it's got to be. And this is, again, back to I'm in. It's back to knowing yourself. And this is why I love Enneagram. It's why I love Kathy Kolbe and the Kolbes. They really teach you how to bring yourself into the equation of whatever you're creating in your life, in your business, in your money, and recognize there it's not a flaw at all.
How would you like people to learn more about you?
My website is christinekane.com, and that's spelled Christine with a C and Kane like Citizen Kane. And my podcast is called The Soul Sourced Business. It's pretty new. That's another new venture. And then you can go to amazon.com and buy my book. It's on for pre-sale right now. It's called The Soul Sourced Entrepreneur. And those are 3 different ways. And there's a lot of free stuff on my site as well. And the podcast is obviously free too. But yeah, or send me an email.
And so when people go to your website, you've mentioned some of your programs that are currently active. I know you have other programs that you've offered and maybe offering still. They'll get on your email list and then
We'll let them know, especially with something like the Enneagram and the Entrepreneur, that may be coming up before the end of the year. I'm doing that again. I'm thinking right now of doing a full-on virtual retreat on business and like sort of part business building and part marketing and part Enneagram. I'm sort of, you know how I do, like I kind of get all creative and think on it, but whatever happens, I definitely will email and let everybody know.
so be sure and get on her list so that you're in the loop as things come up and then definitely the podcast and her book. Thank you so much, Christina. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you in all the ways that I've been able to learn from you and been supported by you over the years. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a true honor, Carrie. And I have to say, for anyone who's listening to Carrie, you could not get a better person to help you with your numbers, with your money. Just hearing how you talk about it here and knowing how much you care about people and their success and honoring their style. I completely love how you approach all of this. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of your podcast. Thanks for having me.